Happy holidays from 702
and Cape Talk.
I suspect budgeting is going to play another role or another part of this conversation that we're about to have now with Sarah Nicholson, who's the operations manager at Just Money. Do you remember, just out of curiosity, that slogan, back to school, back to reality, back to the store, where now whatever you need now? It's an ad. I'm not going to finish it off, but it's an ad. Somebody's got it. Do you remember it? This is that time of the year when those ads start to kick in because, of course, it's going to be the back-to-school rush that we're seeing now, and you're going to need to be making those final purchases for your kids as they go back to school, and it can be a very tricky time to navigate when it comes to the finances because it's things that you can't ignore. It's the cost of your fees, the uniform, the textbooks, the stationery, and all of those will add up. So we're going to hopefully get some answers from Sarah Nicholson about how to navigate this time. Sarah, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us again. Do we have Sarah? Sarah, good
Hello.
evening. Hi, there
Hello.
we go. How are
Hi.
you today?
I'm good, and you?
I'm well, thank you. Let's get to why this time of the year can be so tricky if, again, like I said, you haven't budgeted for it and parents are having to now make those purchases, parents and guardians. I'm not going to leave out the guardians as well, making those last-minute purchases for children that are going back to school.
I think it's such a tricky time of the year because many people have actually been paid their January salaries earlier.
Yeah.
And if you haven't planned properly, and there has perhaps, as your previous interview said, there could be some impulse buying, it does mean that you might not have the necessary funds available to pay for those additional schooling fees, which can be anything from uniforms, stationery, textbooks, as you were touching on earlier. So it can be quite a tricky time because a lot of money's already been spent for many people. And if you have not done planning for this or purchased all of these items ahead of time, it does leave you potentially in a bit of a trickier situation. And of course, schooling is expensive.
Absolutely. Sarah, can we always pin it down to, and the only reason I'm asking this is so that we're able to maybe diagnose part of the problem so that going into the future we're able to get to the bottom of it. Is it usually a lack of planning on the part of parents, or is it a lack of resources, or can it be a combination of both? We just, our salaries just aren't a lot to begin with, and so at the end of the year they're not going to get any much better for us to be able to cover the cost of schooling.
I think it's a number of factors, and of course it's very personal for every single family, and it depends on their personal situations. I think what can help with this is to actually do some planning ahead of the time. If you are, for example, a parent and your kids have been in school for a while, you know what's coming, so you've got the year to actually plan ahead. And I think that's really critical to helping prevent yourself getting into a situation that makes it a bit harder in January. Of course, there are unexpected costs that can come up that you might not have thought of, or perhaps your child is going to different, maybe they're going from primary school to high school or university, and the costs might be quite different. So I think it's just really important to understand what your personal situation is, and then make the best of that by trying to do a little bit more planning ahead. And then, of course, budgeting is absolutely critical. Being prepared for these additional costs, especially if you know that they're coming.
In instances where we haven't been able to budget properly or stick to the budgets where we have been able to make those budgets, are we seeing parents at this time of the year, Sarah, having to sacrifice or cut back on some of the essential spending to cover the cost of, back to school supplies? So are we having to now, miss a payment on, I don't know, the car maybe, and it's just the first thing that comes to mind. But those important payments just so we can cover the cost of this.
Yeah, I think people can land up in situations where if you're having to choose, obviously you want to send your child to school, so you would ideally prioritize that, or would want to prioritize that over those other costs.
Yeah.
So I think it does land up in situations where many parents are actually having to contact the schools to try and make plans with the schools to pay off the schooling fees. A couple of schools actually do offer options to spread payments over the year, which could potentially help ease the financial strain. But it does mean that parents can land up in situations where things like bonds, rent, car fees are not paid, and that often leads into that cycle of debt where you're taking out a payday loan to cover those things, and then you're unable to pay it at the end of the month. So it can lead into a cycle, which one would ultimately want to try and avoid. And then if you are in a situation like that where you are struggling, you need to really take a minute to actually plan, understand where you've got some potential pitfalls, and actually reach out either to a debt counselor if you think that's, if it's gone that bad or that hectically, or just try and plan very carefully and do some very smart thinking around how can you save money at the end of the day.
All right, let's get to the important thing then, how to help parents and guardians navigate this time. The first thing that you've already mentioned is planning, right? You would have planned ahead of time. You would have budgeted where possible ahead of time. But another important thing, which also touches on the conversation that we just had, was when you are in store, comparing the prices. Speak to me about some of the tips and tricks, and maybe starting with the comparison of prices when you're in store.
Definitely. You want to, where possible, shop around for school supplies and also look and take advantage of any deals. So many stores will actually offer deals now for the back-to-school month, and they'll look at discounts, and some will even offer loyalty programs that you could potentially take advantage of. I think what's really important here, and I've experienced it myself with two boys, is often the children want something that is name branded and looks really cool, but might not necessarily be the most practical. And I think such a great opportunity to chat to them and explain why it would be better to get a normal, very easy sharpener that's not going to cost a small fortune and then get lost during the year or broken. So I think it's a good opportunity to just look for more practical items that may or may not get lost, that cost a little bit less than your name brand items, and that can definitely help bring down the overall cost of your spend.
Labeling items, so we're preventing the loss of those items where it is possible. Does that count?
Absolutely critical. I cannot stress this one enough. School clothes are expensive. Blazers, jerseys, jackets, ties, belts, you name it. They often get lost, and it really helps to have these items labeled so that your child can possibly look for it in, the lost and found box, or even get teachers to help you look for those items. There's nothing worse than having to be stuck in winter and an expensive rain jacket has gone missing, and you now need to fork out additional money to replace those items. So it can really help you towards the planning and just saving money during the months ahead.
Here's another one, Sarah. Having to sit down, you mentioned sitting down with your kids and taking them through those expenses, but also trying to avoid where possible. So you're assessing things like your extramural activity, things that you can do without. Kids often take up an activity at the start of the year, a month or two, they're bored or disinterested in it, but you've already paid hefty amounts getting them kits and other equipment. How do you get around that?
As children, especially the youngsters, they want to try absolutely everything, and as parents, you want to give them that opportunity to explore and really experience what's out there and then find what they like. I think a really good tip with this is if your child has taken up something and it has cost quite a lot to get them set up, a good idea is to say to them they have to stick to it for a specific time period, so that you know that you've at least the money that you've put in has been well spent and they've given it a good try, and they're not just, it hasn't just got a little bit hard and now they want to give up, but rather that you've actually put them through and given them a time frame to work within. And I think that helps give the child something to work towards and can actually help keep them in that sport or extramural activity that they've chosen, surprisingly enough. So it's one way of just trying to save money as well, but also prepare your child for sticking to something for a little bit longer than they might normally.
Sarah, just the last one, please, and very briefly, organizing lunchboxes. I think this, for me, expenditure on food at school, very costly. And very briefly, speak to me about how we can get around spending on food and lessening that cost there.
Definitely. As a mom to two boys, they never stop eating. So I think really important to try and plan in advance with your food. I think what's really great is if you try and prepare a lot of your food at home, plan your menu for the week, and then make sure that you've purchased those items so you're not purchasing midweek additional food. Look at baking in batches, maybe cook extra for dinner and use that for lunches for the next day.
Yeah.
Try and avoid prepackaged items as well. That can often just go to waste. And then make your own do-it-yourself snack packs. Get your kids involved. Let them choose what they want as well within reason, as that will just help them to actually eat their food.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're cooking at home, it makes it a little bit easier to get the right nutritional food in as well, and keep your kid healthy. And of course, if you can get some protein in there, it will help keep them fuller for longer.
All right. That's Sarah Nicholson, who's the operations manager at Just Money, speaking to us about our back to school tips and tricks on doing it on a budget. Again, it's that time of the year where some of us still play fast and loose with our budgets. It's a feel-good season, still is. Just because we've hit Jan doesn't mean we're out of it just yet. We want to be part of the festivities, and so we're still a little less cautious, I think, about how we're spending money, right? And this is despite some of the challenging conditions that we've spoken about a number of times that us as consumers are facing with the cost of living crisis. Many of us are still unable to turn down those impulse purchases, which really just put us off track with our monthly budgets, where we're spending money that we don't necessarily have on the items that we don't necessarily need. You can call me a Debbie Downer if you want, but I don't want you to start your year off with impulse buying. So joining me now on the line is Terence Tobin, who's the founder and head financial planner of Rich Ideas Group, to talk us down from impulse buying, that ledge. Terence, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Toby, let's start with the basics. What do we classify as impulse buying? And I'm asked this specifically because I want to make myself feel just a little better with consoling myself that some of the purchases that I make are actually not impulse buying. Speak to me first about what it is.
So let's not be the Debbie Downer, as you said. Impulse buying, I think it's when we walk past an item that we're not quite sure, do we need or do we want? And that, for me, is a big litmus test in this situation. Is it something we really need for our life, for our home, for our family, or is it something we want? And generally, impulse purchases are a want. They're an emotional purchase, and it's something that will make us feel good about ourselves or that decision, but is often very short-lived in its usefulness or its time that we can enjoy that purchase.
Yeah. So is it fair that, like I said in the intro, that because of the nature of the festive season, that it's easier to impulse buy at this time of the year than it would be outside of the holiday season?
100% correct. I mean, our emotions are high. We've probably had a bit of a tough year. We've worked hard. We now get 2 or 3 weeks off with our family, and we want to enjoy time and we want to enjoy our lives a bit. So, we might, like you say, be a little loose with the budget and with the spending habits. Where I like to use with my clients is we like to be intentional with it. And that's where we create awareness by having a budget exercise and making sure that when we do spend, it aligns to that, and we do it with intentionality.
Terence, without pointing out the obvious, and maybe we should point out the obvious, why is impulse buying bad for our financial health?
Often it's done out of emotion and it is not well thought through. We haven't done our research. So, we'll go around and we'll look for something, and because of the time of the year now, we'll see these sales, the sales and people in the stores obviously going to have some targets to push, and we'll feel pressured that we need to now maybe keep up with the neighbors and show that, we've had a solid year, maybe we got a bonus, and we're now using that money to treat ourselves. And is it really a treat if we have to pay it off on a credit card at high interest rates?
Maybe not so much. But you mentioned something interesting now. Retailers obviously take big advantage on this because they know where we are in the season. It's very deliberate, and that's business for them. That's the nature of the business for them. How do they do it? What is it that they try to catch us out on in our impulses?
So they'll use, it's quite clever and interesting marketing techniques. Things will have big, bright colors. We'll have big sale signs. We'll have these markdown stickers. And in the store, we often don't have time to now do our research. And I love doing research, and one must do that for themselves.
Yeah.
and to make sure that an item really is on sale. And sometimes I'm sure you've seen these social media posts where if you peel back the sticker or you look at the previous label, it's exactly the same price. If not, now it's even more, but it's got the bright colored sales logo on it. You know, there's good music playing. There's a nice vibe in the shop. So, you know, 2 for 1 is maybe not as cheap as it sounds.
Yeah. So how do we then get around that? If I pitch up to a store, it's the festive season. The bright colors are, of course, going to be appealing to me. Let's start from the top. What do I need to avoid when I walk into a shop? Maybe it's not on my to-do list for the day, but I come across an item that I think, actually, maybe I do need it. And again, like you said, there's not enough research, not enough time to do the research about whether an item really is marked down or not, whether I can do with pushing it back and buying it maybe next month. It might be cheaper, might not. But what's the first thing that I do when I walk into a shop and I try to figure out if I can actually add an item into my basket or not?
That's where I feel we have to go back a step or two, and that's where we use a budget.
Sure.
And we, in that budget, have made provision for this. You know, and I like to do that to make sure that I'm intentional with my spending. And I will now have, me personally and my family will have a bit of that pocket money for December, where I've got a few thousand rand that I can go and have some fun with and do the impulse purchases. But during the year, every week, I put aside a little bit of money for that. So when I now come on holiday, I have 2,000 rand, you know, and that's below the budget money. It's go and have some fun. It's not be thinking about it, but, you know, oh, that shirt does look good, or oh, my daughter does deserve that. And I can go and spend that money without regret or remorse, knowing that I've still made provisions for my other needs versus my wants.
Yeah. So the first thing would be a budget?
And that's where I'd recommend that. Yes.
Okay, the next step.
Have that budget, and then try and have that conversation with yourself in store, and try and find a quiet little spot and just go like, this is interesting. You know, do I need this? Is it really aligned to what, you know, aligns to my values? Can I actually afford it? Because you should have a fair understanding and idea of how much money is in your bank account at any point in time, hopefully, because you've been intentional with your spending. And knowing where you're at in that festive season and other commitments you might have during the festive season, and now obviously coming into January, what obligations you might have waiting for you around the corner that you maybe didn't plan for, but now are going to rear their ugly heads. Again, just being intentional. I know I'm repeating, it's not as sexy as it sounds, but it's just being in that moment and being present with what you're going to do.
When we are drawing up the budget, Terence, especially for this time of the year at least, gifts, for example, are one of the big spending ticket items, I think, at this time of the year. How am I working out, outside of the other expenses that I have, which would generally be part of my budget, I need to spend on my car expenses, I need to spend on the household expenses, I need to buy the groceries, I need to pay off my credit account debt, and so on. Those are the standard costs that are there generally. How do I, for this time of the year, then figure out the other, I guess, the more friendlier spending? How do I add those to a budget? Who I'm spending on and so on?
Fantastic question. So what's nice now is it's in our recent memory, because we've just done it a week or two ago and done all the spending and given the gifts. Yeah. So let's go look at our bank statements and see what we spent and who we gave it to. Make a little list. I love the old school. Get a pen and paper. Write it out. Don't use an app. Don't get fancy. Good old school pen and paper. Write down who you bought for and how much you spent. And is that likely to be for the same people and the same amount now for the end of 2025? If it is, add up that figure, and you've now got 12 months to start putting aside that money. I like to do it on a little weekly basis. It feels less intimidating than a monthly payment. So I'll take that figure, divide it by 50, and now I'll put aside into my little bank savings account or savings pocket or whatever little provision your bank has generally via your app, and you put aside 200 Rand, 300 Rand, whatever the number is, each week. Make it a scheduled payment, and this is a key element here. Automate that, so that you don't have to remember every Monday to transfer 300 Rand.
Okay.
Go in, schedule it, automate it, and forget it. And you'll see in a couple of months' time, you're like, oh, wow, now I've got 3 grand. Okay, now I've got 4 grand. And you're building up that kitty. So come November, December time, you've now got the money already set aside to go and have fun and splurge on the loved ones.
I don't know, Terence, if it will make it all the way to November or December. I mean, I suppose that's where a budget would play into play, right? Where I'm not having to dip into money that wouldn't have been set aside for something specific. And I guess it will go back to what you were saying now when it comes to budgets. But just out of curiosity as well, Terence, what are some of the common things people spend impulsively on?
So gifts is a big one. Yeah. Gifts, holidays, the unforeseen expenses. So this might now not be splurging, but this is sadly when life throws you a curveball.
Yeah.
You know, you get a puncture in your tire, or you hit a pothole, or the geyser bursts, or you have that sore tooth and you have to go at 2 o'clock in the morning to the emergency room. And that's where we advocate for that emergency fund or the get out of trouble money. And in similar situation like the savings account, you have that money available immediately.
Yeah.
Because what we sadly see is when these life events occur and our budget hasn't been set up correctly or structured, or we haven't made provision for it, many folks unfortunately have to take on expensive debt to now manage what Murphy has thrown at them.
Yeah. We have a comment here on WhatsApp. It says, "Good evening, not Stephen." Yes. Impulse buying. This is in regards, obviously, to the conversation that we're having now. The sales are timed to get the last of your December money from you. That's from Granny T. Is that one of the other strategies that retailers use?
I'm sure it is. And I can't speak with conviction on that one, but pretty certain it is. I mean, we're seeing sales and specials left, right, and center. They're popping up in our social media feeds. When you walk around the mall and you see these things pop up, every single store is having a 30, 40, 50% off sale. But then when I go and look at the pricing and you compare the stores, you're kind of like, but that T-shirt's almost the exact same price everywhere else.
Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying. Maybe the savings plan might not last to November. Perhaps start buying those gifts a little earlier and putting them away in the cupboard. That self-control is difficult. And that's where your certified financial planner can help you as the accountability partner and keep you aligned to what's actually important to you.
Terence, just as a last one, please, and I want you to tie in the accountability. The impulse spending is not just at the beginning of the year or during the festive period, but we often fall into those traps even during the year as well. Speak to me just very briefly about having those accountability measures in place, having a mentor, a financial mentor, or a financial advisor, or other checks and balances that can be in place throughout the year as well, outside of the big spending holidays.
So exactly that. That's where your financial planner, for instance, we would meet with you, say, once a quarter. We'd understand where you are in that 90-day cycle, potentially what's coming up. Because we have so many conversations with so many families, we can see things that you might not be aware of. And we'll help you align your hard-earned cash and your hard-earned income to what's valuable and important to you. Things like anniversaries, birthdays, graduations, kids' school fees or outings will help you provision those in a budget, in a cash flow, so that it's less of a surprise and it doesn't feel as impulsive when those events occur. Yeah. You've got the money ready to handle them.
All right. That's Terence Tobin, who's the founder and head financial planner of Rich Ideas Group, speaking to us about trying to avoid and speaking yourself off of the ledge of impulse buying. It goes back to a lot of the things that we've been speaking about over the past couple of days on the show. Remember that budget. It plays such a critical role in trying to manage your expenses over the festive period and throughout the rest of the year. John Manyike, who is the head of financial education at Old Mutual, is joining us on the line this evening, and he's going to share some insights on the growing phenomenon of side hustles, highlighting the benefits, the risks, and the role, again, very importantly, the role of financial literacy that it plays in successful side hustles. And maybe you can get some ideas going forward on how to manage your side hustle. John, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Good evening to you. Thanks for having me.
John, there's plenty of research, right, that shows that there's a dramatic increase in entrepreneurship and that activity in the country, with more individuals, again, starting businesses or engaging in one form or another of side hustling. What are some of the key takeaways I know that Old Mutual recently did a study of sorts. It was called the Savings and Investment Monitor for 2024. What were some of the key takeaways of that study?
Yeah, so in 2024, we did a survey, as we usually do, where we track the savings and spending habits and trends of South Africans.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we particularly looked at was the extent to which South Africans are starting to warm up to the gig economy, and the extent to which we are seeing people having side hustles. And what we found in 2024 was that 47% of our respondents actually said they are engaged in a business of some sort, which definitely demonstrate that there's certainly an inclination towards entrepreneurial ventures. As people now are starting to understand that a single income is not enough. It's not enough to cover debts. I mean, we've had our fair share of challenges when it comes to the economy itself. Even those who are in business, I mean, we're really struggling, and of course, coming from launching. So I think there's been a lot of pressure on individuals. But apart from the survey that we did ourselves, I mean, even when you look at other studies that are done, I think even in 2021, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor South Africa's report also showed that about 17.5% of adult population were engaging in entrepreneurial activity. And I'm not surprised why this trend is becoming more pronounced, because if you look at some of the most developed economies around the world, the small to medium businesses are the biggest drivers of economies.
Yeah. What do some of this research, the data from the research, tell us, whether it's from the survey that Old Mutual did or the global one that you spoke of just now? What does it really tell us about the workforce in South Africa?
I think what we're seeing is the fact that people have now come to terms with the fact that the salary increases are not necessarily meeting the inflation trend, and they are struggling to make ends meet, and they are dealing with a lot of debts. And I think one thing that certainly shifted the dial for many South Africans was COVID itself, and I'm sure the impact would have been similar in many countries around the world.
Yes.
But I think there's certainly been a spike of entrepreneurial activities post-COVID, because then suddenly people realize that this thing of having an emergency fund of some sort, of supplementing your income, is no longer an option that you can choose not to pursue. I think for me, that is probably one of the reasons that people are pivoting to having side hustles.
That was actually my next question, about whether or not it answers the question about the trend that we're seeing. Speak to me about then that pivot post-COVID-19, and often economists will tell you that we measure everything against the last disaster that we had, and COVID, I think, was one of the bigger ones, where people were for a very long time out of their usual salaries for some time, because businesses closed down and the demand in the market, all of that was taken away from them. And then, of course, you need a way to supplement what would have been an income. So speak to me about then that pivot post-COVID-19, the trends that we're seeing when it comes to side hustles. Where are they and what are they?
Yeah, so look, I mean, and you know what is also quite interesting is that it's not really complicated stuff. I mean, it's things that people can be easily creative about. I mean, things like, look, we know the hair business in South Africa is quite big. It's probably one of, I would argue, one of the easiest to land with not so hard and fast rules or even, capital requirements, because one of the barriers to small to medium businesses is having capital. So I think because people are finding ways to sell things, because these days with social media or selling things online, you don't necessarily have to keep stock. When you advertise your products and you are able to use the payment that the customer has made to actually buy the stock and then keep your profit. So I think people have found ways to be able to do business without actually using their own money. And I think for me, that's the uniqueness of it. And I think we are starting to align with some of the global trends in terms of people doing business online, because, of course, renting offices can be quite expensive. So I think we're seeing more and more of that, those trends of people venturing into those type of opportunities. And I think one must give credit to those who came up with social media, because now suddenly you have a lot of young people also having a side hustle of some sort. For some, it's even the main thing, because they've become influencers. They're starting to promote products on behalf of brands. They're starting to become brand ambassadors. I think these are very interesting times, especially given the profile of unemployment in South Africa.
Naturally, John, one of the benefits of starting a side hustle would obviously then be additional income. What are some of the other positives of starting a side hustle?
Well, one of the advantages is the fact that, once you have a side hustle, then you are able to save, because when you ask South Africans, why are we having this poor culture of savings and investing, people will tell you, but we don't earn enough. So, but if you don't earn enough, it doesn't mean that's the end of the world. If you can think creatively, if you can solve a problem, if you can have a side hustle, that can actually help you to start saving. Or, it can also help you to charge down your debt and, settle some of your debts. And basically, when it comes to wealth creation, you just have to think creatively, because, if you have look, I know someone might argue when I say that to become a wealthy employee is not easy. I mean, unless you are, in those boards and where you become a director and very, very senior roles. But for just an average employee, there's no way you're going to be wealthy with a salary. You just have to think creatively and think out of the box.
Yeah. The drawbacks of it, it's good and well to be able to supplement your income, to be able to save. What are the drawbacks, though? There have to be some challenges involved.
No, of course. I think one of the most obvious one is, of course, the issue of fatigue. Because if you are double betting, basically doing your 9 to 5, and then after hours and you've got other side hustles, there's a possibility you can burn out. So, and the issue of work balance become something impossible, because you are working after your 9 to 5. The other issue is the conflicts with employers, because when you start a side hustle, and some of it some of these opportunities would require you to be present. They will require you to do a bit of work during normal office hours, and yet you're employed. That's why employers would have a conflict of interest policy, and they would actually place their terms forward as part of the employer's policies that you may not use the employer's resources. And so at times people do run into trouble with their own employers and having to use the employer's resources, laptop, employer's time, and things like that. So those are some of the challenges that people are having. And I think let's not also underestimate the risk that this could pose in terms of people's health, because your body does need to rest at some point. So if you're working and there's no time to rest, you might start having other health complications.
Yeah. If you're just tuning us now, I'm having a conversation with John Manyike, who is the head of financial education at Old Mutual, about turning really your passion into profit. If you're thinking of starting a side hustle, if you think you're unable to get by with the salary that you currently have, and if you have any questions for John that you might have, particularly about starting a side hustle and what it is that you need to do to get around it, please, again, the number to dial is 011 883 0702, or you can WhatsApp us on 072 702 1702. John, I mentioned that right at the start that obviously financial literacy plays a critical role in my head when you're having to manage a business, whether it's the only thing you're focused on or if it's part of a side hustle and you have another gig on the side. But speak to me about the role of financial literacy and whether South Africans were financially literate enough.
Look, I think there's a room for improvement. In fact, a big one, because we still have challenges with financial literacy. Let's call it a backlog, financial literacy backlog, not only in South Africa but around the world. And having spoken to quite a number of people who are running small to medium businesses, and some of their struggles, most of them, is because they cannot draw a line between business finances as well as personal finance. So the lines are blurred. as a result, they cannot manage their cash flow. So I think financial literacy would be very useful for many people, because it's not just about making money. You must know how to make money, but you must also know how to grow money. You must also know how to keep money.
Yeah.
So if you cannot do those things, you would actually be doing a lot of work, but you cannot see where your business is going. I mean, because you're going to struggle with cash flow. You struggle with keeping records for your business. You struggle with filing or seeing the need to actually have other service providers such as a bookkeeper, because you can't be a jack of all trades. You do need some help from experts.
And if I am starting a side hustle, John, where then do I get some of these skills to upskill myself, trying to manage the books, trying to manage people, marketing, and all these other things? And you, as the head of financial education at Old Mutual, would have the know-how, right? So how do the rest of us who are interested then find these opportunities to learn and upskill ourselves as business owners?
I think we need to do some research on some of the SETAs that are here available to support small to medium businesses in South Africa. I think a lot of people are not aware that some of these SETAs are actually focused on specific sectors, so whether you're in services or whether you in whatever sector that you may find yourself in. So find out which SETA is relevant there. But there are other institutions like your CEDA, you've got some of the agencies that are available to support. Yes, some of them, they do provide funding, and as part of providing funding, but they also see a need to provide some kind of skills. Yeah. We also have an entity such as Masisizane at Old Mutual, for example, that helps small to medium businesses, but they also provide post-investment support to make sure that it's not enough to just advance a small to medium business without providing the necessary support and skills, because otherwise you're going to have a problem. Because a lot of business, especially the small to medium businesses, they tend to fail in the first 2 to 3 years because of not having the requisite skills.
All right, before we carry on, I just want to have a listen to this voice note that came through shortly.
4 years when I was in the motor industry.
Okay, we'll give it a try in just a bit. Hopefully we'll be able to play it again in just a short bit. John, looking ahead of 2025, I almost said 2024. I had to stop there for 2 seconds. Looking ahead into 2024, what's the advice that you would give somebody who wants to maybe only now just starting out a side hustle, or maybe somebody who already has one within that critical 1 to 2 years that you just mentioned? Now then small businesses tend to fail. What do they need to do?
I think one needs to start looking at what skills do they have? What is your passion? Because a lot of these side hustles are actually birthed, out of passions that people have. And you just have a love for this thing, whatever it is. Because that could be a sign for you that actually that's the area that you need to venture into when it comes to starting a business. So, the minute you start exploring your passions and your skills, you may just find that you've got strength in that area and you do it effortlessly. And I think it's the worst thing is for anybody to start a business in an area that's not their strength, so because you're going to become resentful, because that's why you shouldn't be copying, look at your skills, look at your own interests, your own passions. And also could be the location where you are, and look at what is the need in your area. What problem can you solve? Because business is really about solving a problem and making money out of it. If you cannot solve a problem, you cannot make money.
All right, we're going to give that voice note another quick try.
4 years when I was in the motor industry, I was doing 2 side hustles. And then one of them was selling ice cream, awesome ice cream pot. And then the other one was doing websites, which Modise Family websites. And then these 2 side hustles give me so much that one of them had to become my bread and butter when I decided to leave the motor industry to give it my full attention. And today what was side hustles is now my bread and butter, what I do every day. That's the advantage about side hustles, is that you end up trying to do something to get extra money, and then you end up doing something you love.
Thank you so much for that voice note, John. Just out of curiosity, and just as we close, is there room for companies to empower workers that have side hustles? You mentioned earlier that one of the drawbacks could be a conflict of interest between the employer and the employee who has a side hustle. But is there a way that we can turn that around and perhaps allow for companies to, give workers back that time and empower them in one way or another?
Well, I think it's quite a tricky one, to be honest, because remember, the employer also exists because they have their own business imperatives. They want to meet their targets and things like that. Yes, employers tend to be very open in supporting employees with studying to improve their skills, but when it comes to starting their own business, the first thing that they would worry about is not this venture would not impact on the focus and the concentration levels of the employee to the extent that the business will start suffering. So they will certainly prioritize their own business as opposed to focusing on unless if there's a business model that they want to test and they want to start shaving off staff. I think in that context, some employers may be willing to support when they know that they might be retrenching in the next couple of years. They might want to do that so that they rather do business with the employees to become suppliers in the near future. But it just doesn't happen without any context.
All right. That's John Manyike, who's the head of financial education at Old Mutual, turning your passion into profit. If you have an idea, perhaps give it a shot at the start of this year at 7 o'clock. Let's get the latest in your Eyewitness News. If you have kids in the house right now in the car with you, please, I need you to bring them into this particular conversation, because often the conversations that we've been having throughout the past couple of days have been about money and how you and I relate to them as how you and I rather relate to money as adults, right? But I also want to talk about kids, right? Because good money habits start with understanding money at a very early stage. We spoke about this even last week, about how even now as adults, we understand money and we relate to money and we engage with money based on how we were conditioned when we were growing up. So to foster financial independence and to set children up for financial success later on in life, I think it's crucial that, again, we bring them into these important conversations and to teach them basic financial skills that will help them grow into adults that are financially literate. I've got on the line now Debbie McChrystal, who's the founder of Conscious Kids and a life coach for kids, to speak to us about this. Tell me though, if you're listening now, how old were you when you opened your first bank account? I think my older sister and I, we had our first bank accounts when we were about 11 or 12. There was no money in it because we had no money. And often they're not. Actually, by the time we closed down our accounts, we had plenty of charges that had racked up on it, and we just, the charges couldn't get anything because we didn't have the money. And I wish we understood money better now. But tell me how old you were when you first opened your account. 011-883-0702 or WhatsApp us on 072-702-1702. Debbie, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. How do kids actually understand money? Let's start there.
Hi, thanks for having me. I think the most important thing that we need to understand is that kiddies are able to understand money from little.
Yeah.
And I think, the earlier we start, the better. And I think another thing is that I think there's a sort of a idea with parents that we're all kind of nervous to have the talk because maybe we're not so great with money ourselves. And we tend to sort of not want to do it because we don't want to feel uncomfortable ourselves. And I think in that is where we need to sort of change the way we look at it. And maybe it's a place for us to learn ourselves while we're teaching our kids on what money, managing money looks like. But like you said about the bank account thing, I think as something that's really important to understand is that children, learn tactile, and from physical experience. And, a bank account is not, it's kind of a subliminal kind of in the cloud concept that's hard to grasp. So, I think when we're teaching, down to, I don't know about you, but when I was tiny, I had one of those old-fashioned tills, where you had the paper, you had those sorts of things. And I think, starting there where children have physical money to begin to understand the concept of, I've got 5 of these things and they can get me X, or, but there's a physical action that's happening between this is what I've got, so this is what I want, and can the two meet? And if not, what do I need to do in order to get there? And that's a concept that can start really, really little. And I think those are important lessons. I think the other thing that's really important that we should be doing is having the conversations with our kids around, when we go to the shops that we need to buy groceries, and and when you, even little kiddies, you walk into the shops and you say, this is my list of things that we need to buy, and and have a conversation around these 4 different kinds of, I don't know, spaghetti. Can you find the cheapest one? So that they're looking for those things from little, and it's and make it fun. It doesn't have to be. And that's the other thing. I think the conversations, depending on, our relationships in our marriages or our, whatever our financial situation is if kids are hearing conversations that are, money's bad and, money's tight and, it can kind of become the devil. And we don't want to create that for kids. We want them to understand that money is a means to incredibly awesome things, and to create that kind of excitement where they can picture something that they really want, and get excited about it and understand that money's kind of the road that's going to get them there.
Yeah. Debbie, you've mentioned something that I think is quite important, destigmatizing money, right? And making sure that kids understand that even though we repeat it often, subconsciously or otherwise, that money is the root of all evil, and understanding that, that's how they then relate to it. At what age do we then start to have this conversation? Because again, we often make it so complex. There's terms and terminology that we use, and it's just bigger picture for kids. So at what point and at what age do we start to introduce it to them without overwhelming them about money?
Look, again, I think as early as possible, and I think it probably starts with, there's research that says, there are various debates around chores, but I stand quite firm in the fact that there is a space for children to have chores, because I think it's important that they understand that, that work is a concept that they are heading into, and we want to make sure that kids understand that we don't just go off during our day and come back later. We actually have to go and do physical or, whatever, but we have to put in the work in order to get the reward. And I think chores is a really good place for them to start understanding. Now, just to be clear, I don't think making your bed and putting your clothes in the wash basket is a chore you should be paid for. But I do think that as a family, it's a conversation that looks like there's X amount of things that you do because we're a family, and then there's other things that you do because, you can earn money for them. And then, to get them excited. And I love the concept of, giving them physical money where, and then I don't know if you've heard of the 3 folders. So you have a save folder, a spend folder, and a give folder, because so you would save because you created, and you sit with them and you say, like, what is something that you really want, and how much does it cost, and how much do you have to save to get there, so that you're building up delayed gratification, which is incredibly important, but also an excitement for something that's coming. And then the other one would be spend. And in spend space, I think I think it's really cool to, in that space, is to allow them to spend. And even if they spend badly, at least it's a small risk where there is an opportunity for learning, So if they go to the store and they buy all the sweets with all their money, then it means, the next day if their sibling or whatever has still got money left over, or, if there's something else that they wanted, that's the lesson, is you don't have the money anymore. And I think that's also a space where parents need to be vigilant and not cave into shame, my poor child, I don't want them to, suffer.
Yeah.
So we've got to stick to it, but let them learn the small lessons while the risk is small, and not when they're 30 and they've maxed out all the credit cards and then they're sitting in debt and miserable. And then also the give folder, which I think is really important, because when we go and we give, we also, it does something to our emotional selves. There's a joy that comes from giving, and especially little kids, when they can hand something over to somebody else, it gives them great pleasure, and that creates again the excitement of the ability, of what the possibility that money can hold when we use it nicely and have a good relationship with it.
Yeah. Debbie, you've mentioned, I think twice already in the conversation, that you prefer to teach your kids through the use of hard cash, right? But things have changed in the past, say 10 to 20 years, when we were much younger. I mean, financial services have evolved. There's banks and there's all these other great innovations, I suppose, when it comes to finances, even for the younger ones. How then do we change the conversation so that we balance the two? So there's still a need for them to have piggy banks at home and understand cash from that aspect, but also bringing them into how technology has changed, where they can interact and save online and all these other cool ways that are more relatable for them in the era that they grow up in.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think it is something that we definitely need to be doing. And there again, I would say as parents, I think it's really important that we bring them into kind of the day-to-day stuff that we have to do. And maybe it looks like, you can get various apps where they can download and they can see through graphs and whatever what's happening with money. But I think it's conversations where you can, age appropriately. I talk about the physical money, I think, for your little ones, because, their concrete concept is there. Whereas the older ones, you can start having technology conversations. But I mean, that's not to say you can't with the little ones, but put them on your lap while you're paying bills and say, this is how much money is in the bank account, and look how much has got to go to here, and look how much has got to go to there, and understand how much, we pay for lights and and water and all of those sorts of things, so that they can see what bills look like, and watching the money move out of bank accounts as well. And like I said, there are apps that you can use where they can, almost even have mock stock markets investments, where they can get themselves into understanding those sorts of things without, massive loss of any kind.
Yeah.
But I think again, it's very much us as parents being vulnerable in the sense of like, I don't want to, burden my children with stuff that they don't have to deal with now because they're little and they'll learn when they're older.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really converse way of looking. It's not beneficial to them at all. We've got to remember that we're raising future adults who need to function in the world.
Yeah.
So, I'm not saying tell them exactly how much you earn, but they need to understand what a bill looks like versus what your salary looks like, and how those transactions work, and that it's not just a phone that you tap and never ending amounts of money just gets comes out of
at
nowhere.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Debbie, very briefly and lastly, if there are parents right now that are listening and want to get their children into the idea of money and understanding, and like you said, the smaller risks now when they're younger, and they want to learn how to invest, learn how to budget, where do they need to go to find these resources so that they're able to teach themselves and they're able to teach their children as well?
Yeah, look, I think there's quite a few apps that are used. Like I said, there's the mock stock markets. There's some brilliant books. There's a Manage Your Money, like an adult, which there's one for adults, which has a swear word in it, which I won't say, but it's a brilliant book. But there is another one that's Manage Your Money, like an adult for kids, which is a brilliant book for kiddies, for teens to read.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think, in terms of teaching kids, budgeting and that kind of thing, make it a family game. Sit around on a Friday night and plan, where do we want to go on holiday, or what's an activity that we want to do, and get them involved, get them to Google the costs of things and, understand all of those concepts.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, there's apps-wise, there's a Greenlight, there's a Piggybot, there's a Bankaroo. There's quite a lot of apps if you go onto, the app stores.
Yeah.
And then there's Dave Ramsey, I think, is a really cool guy to listen to on YouTube, who talks quite substantially around kids and parenting, with money and understanding. So, there's a lot of support out there for that stuff that makes it fun.
Yeah. If you're a parent,
and I think that's the key.
Yeah. Of course. If you're a parent, please take advice from Debbie and teach your kids young. Explore some of these apps and resources that are available online. Bring them into that conversation about money. That's Debbie McChrystal, who's the founder of Conscious Kids and a life coach for kids. I want to stay still with the conversation about your kids and how we manage finances, but this would probably be slightly outside of their purview, right? If you're a co-parent and you're trying to navigate, already there's the legal aspect of it and trying to figure out how as co-parents you manage that. But added to it, there's the issue of money and how, as co-parents who live separately but raising, a child or children with your former partner, or maybe somebody that you're in the process of getting a divorce from, or somebody that you had a child, even if you weren't in a relationship with, you still have to figure out the issue of money. Joining me now is Linda Yende, who's a relationship coach, to perhaps try to understand better how co-parents can manage financial responsibility. Linda, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Good evening, Nukanya. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. How are you, Lind?
Fantastic, thank you.
Tell me, what are some of the challenges of co-parenting, maybe broadly, and then specifically when it comes to managing money, when it comes to the children that you share with the former partner?
I think there are two very divergent sides to this.
Yeah.
The one side is where a parent decides that they're going to punish the other parent because of the financial issues that exist between them. That's a really big one because, people tend to forget that there are two relationships that a parent has with their child. They have the emotional relationship, the presence, the being in the child's life, and there's a financial relationship.
Yeah.
Now, what often happens is sometimes a parent will then decide that, you are leaving me, and as such, I'm going to punish you by then not looking after you, not looking after our child. I want you to suffer. I want you to come back to me begging on your hands and knees, type of thing. So that's one thing. The flip side of this is when we overcompensate as parents.
Ah, okay.
So all of a sudden you are spoiling the child rotten every time that they are with you, whenever they're staying with you, etc. You're almost trying to win the child's affection by being the better parent, and that in itself is doing too much. And needless to say, this is worse when one parent has more resources available to them than the other. Now, all of a sudden, you want to be, the favorite parent. You want to be the parent that always buys these toys and buys these things and does all sorts of things. So there'll always be those two divergent sides, either doing too little or doing too much.
Linda, how then do we balance when, obviously there's never a point where we earn exactly the same amount as the other partner or the former partner. So how then do we figure out how we split the financial responsibility of a child, taking into consideration who earns more and who's able to do what and when, without trying to outshine the other parent in that context that you just mentioned now?
One of the best things you could ever do as parents, and, it's very hard, especially when you are breaking up, when you are in the middle of a divorce, etc., etc. You're already at loggerheads with one another. But the best thing you could ever do is find a way to present a united front as parents. So we are still your parents, and we are still, everything that we do, we can still do jointly as your parents. And it starts with the little things. The birthday gift, when you were together, you never said this gift was from mom and this one was from dad.
Yeah.
This was a gift from us as your parents. But all of a sudden, those dynamics start to change because, you are apart. So it starts with the little things like that, where you say, you know what, this is what we are going to do. Mom and daddy have bought you this. Mom and daddy are doing this for you. And in the child's eyes, you are co-parenting, properly co-parenting when you do that.
Yeah.
Because every single conversation says, this is from mommy and daddy. Mommy and daddy have sat down and thought about it, and we'd like to take you on holiday. You're going to go with mommy, but it is mommy and daddy's decision.
Yeah.
All of those things are a presentation of a united front. And it takes a lot of maturity. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's a very difficult thing to do, especially when, as a parent, you feel that you probably should be getting more credit for what is happening.
Yeah. Linda, the sad reality is that it's not always going to turn out or pan out the way we hope, right? We aren't always able to present a united front when it comes to dealing with the children as co-parents in an event where we are unable to, speak in a united voice or sing from the same hymn book. How then do we manage that without it spilling over to the relationship that we have with the children on either part of the parents?
I think probably the most important conversation you need to be having with self is this in the best interest of the child? Is this serving me or is this serving the child? And this is with regard to almost everything that you do, almost every conversation that you have. It should always be in the best interest of the child.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example, and it's not a financial one, but I think it's one that is totally apt.
Please.
One parent is late to come fetch the child or to come in with the gift or to, they're delayed for whatever reason. You don't sit there and stomp your feet and say, oh, your dad or your mom, because already you're kind of giving this impression that the one parent perhaps cares less about their child than they really do. And, the same can be said for situations where perhaps one parent is struggling financially to do those those niceties that they used to do. You should actually be covering that person up, that parent up. Because people then take it to the other extreme and start not allowing the parent to come see the child, not allowing the parent to be present in their child's life simply because they are struggling financially at that period.
Yeah.
So it's the little things that you then sit there and think to yourself, what does this translate to in my little child's mind? My little child's mind will only think this means daddy doesn't care or mommy doesn't care or whatever about me. And that is a lot more damaging than any other message any other agenda that you might have in your head, trying to discredit a parent.
Yeah.
It's so much more important to focus on the impact that all of this has on your child. That is the big thing.
Yeah. Linda, just lastly then, what are some of the do's and don'ts of having a conversation between co-parents about the financial responsibilities for the children? aside from, I mean, you mentioned having a conversation, presenting a united front, those being perhaps among the top, on the agenda when it comes to co-parenting. But what are some of the other do's and don'ts, just briefly?
I think the most important things to always remember is, one, you are forming and you are shaping this child's attitudes for the rest of their lives. So always act in the best interest of the child. Always work towards presenting a united front. Always remember that circumstances can and do change. And sooner or later, things will be slightly different, things will be better, things will be worse. And the child, though, will still be stuck with whatever negative thing you may have said at a bad time. So always remember that everything that you say and that you do in front of the child has far-reaching consequences, will stay with this child for their entire life.
All right, that's Linda Yende, who's a relationship coach. The do's and don'ts when you're co-parenting. Remember, circumstances do change, but always have conversations between yourselves as parents. Present a united front where it is possible. It's always in the best interest of the child. That must be at the top of your mind at all times in all exchanges. I want to switch now our attention to, again, because it's the beginning of the year and it's the 2nd of January, and we still have to reflect. I'm not going to let you off the hook that easily. I do still want us to do those reflections. I'm going to bring Paula Quincy into the conversation. She's the founder of Engaged Humans, and she's going to be speaking to us about the importance of reflecting on the past and sharing those some of those lessons from the past and converting them and turning them into lessons going forward. How do we make them valuable lessons? How do your achievements and your setbacks inform your personal and your professional growth going into the new year? Paula, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us yet again this week.
Hi, good evening to you and the listeners, and Happy New Year.
A very Happy New Year to you, Paula. Tell me, Paula, how important is it of an exercise to look back into the year that's gone? I suppose in the context of now going forward and trying to figure out where we stand for the year, what it is that we want to achieve. How important is it to go back first?
I think it is critically important because, that's how we reflect and how we actually observe and notice life's lessons and how we are growing and evolving as an individual in our life, both personally and from a professional perspective when it comes to our career.
Yeah. Is it a once-off activity or is it something that we need to be doing continuously?
I think it's something that we should be doing continuously. So, if you can, ideally sit down every quarter and reflect back on that quarter. What are the things that you've achieved or accomplished? And they don't have to be huge, big goals. It could be, simple things like, well, I've wanted to eat healthier and I've managed to stick to that and accomplish that. And so I feel better about myself. Or it could be something big that you have set for yourself, and it not only helps us sort of know how we are progressing in life and what we're accomplishing, but also reflecting on challenges that we have overcome and what are the skills or what are the life lessons that we've learned from that. Tough times give us skills as well. They help us build resilience. They help us build perseverance, determination, patience, all of those things.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, Paula, if we are looking back and you say quarterly, and I think it might be easier if we break it up into quarters as opposed to waiting for 366 days to go by before you start doing this exercise, because it will be overwhelming. But if we are going at it quarter by quarter, the things that I am looking to figure out whether I've managed to achieve or not, would these have been things that I perhaps wrote down at the start of the year as New Year's resolutions or goals or whatever you want to call them, so that I'm able to then say, at the beginning of the year, I said I wanted to eat healthier. At the end of the first quarter, that's what I'm looking out for. Is that the sort of, do I need to have written them down to begin with to know what I'm going back to look for?
Most definitely. I think, when you write something down, you become much more intentional about it. And, it's life. You're taking life by the hands and making life happen as opposed to sitting back and waiting for life to happen for you.
So I think it is important to sit down and be intentional about what are the things that you want to focus on and or achieve this year.
Yeah.
But you don't have to wait until the beginning of the year to do it. You can start any time you want to. But I think a lot of people just get caught up in, well, New Year, New Year's resolutions and the tradition thereof.
Yeah. How deep do we go when we are looking back? And I'm only asking this because I also don't want us to get too stuck on the past and what it is that I wasn't able to do or what it is that I was able to do. So how much of it do we look at, and how deep into what we were able to do or what we weren't able to do we look at, so that we're not still stuck in the past when we're going forward?
Yeah, I think, reflecting and going, have I achieved the things I wanted to? And that's great. What are the next things that I want to focus on? And then also looking back on life with gratitude and being grateful for, the good times, the happy moments, but also the challenging times, and having an attitude of gratitude as opposed to beating yourself up over, the things that didn't go the way that you wanted them to, or the challenging times, because that is what keeps us stuck in the past.
Yeah. Is it an equal reflection of good versus bad, Paula? Or because I don't want to go into 2025 with this long list of things that I wasn't able to achieve throughout the course of 2024. Now I'm just being dragged down and pulled back by, the regret of having not achieved some of the goals that I've done. But also want to go into it with a positive spirit, because actually on the other side, I was able to achieve 50% or 70% of the goals that I set out. So is it a 50% good versus bad?
I don't think there's any written rule on what that split should look like.
Yeah.
I think it's what feels right for you and what feels comfortable for you, and that you're not beating yourself up over. And I think it is important to look at the good and the bad or the negative, because those things make us stronger and help us overcome, challenging times going forward, because we've built those essential skills when it comes to resilience and perseverance and determination, but also knowing when to let go and when to walk away from things that are no longer serving us.
Yeah. With this exercise of introspection, Paula, am I only looking at the internal factors? Some like we said, the goals that I'd set out for myself. I was able to eat healthy. I was able to go to the gym, or I wanted to start a new job and I scored myself a good job. Or should I also be looking at external factors? So things like, I don't know, who I'm spending my time with the most, or where I'm going for. Do those sort of things also impact my growth as a person?
Most definitely. It's everybody kind of uses the 1st of September or spring day to spring clean, but you can do that any time of the year as well. And definitely part of that is looking back at, the people that you're spending your time with and surrounding yourself with, both personally and professionally. Are they lifting you, or are they leaning on you? Are they draining you of energy, or are they giving you energy? Are they helping you to become a better version of yourself, or is it adding a negative spin to your life and toxic? Those are the things that you need to look back and go, how are they adding value to my life, positively or negatively? And what do I want to take forward with me? Because if I keep doing the same thing, I'm going to keep getting the same results.
All right. I want to split these into practical exercises, I guess, so that at least for me, so that when I go home, and I hope somebody else who's also listening can do this practically, maybe tonight or tomorrow or whenever it suits you best. So I want to split them up, Paula. You mentioned that this is not only beneficial for professional growth, but it's also good for personal growth. Let's start with personal growth. When I am introspecting on who I am from last year, what are the questions that I need to be asking myself, and what do I then do with these questions when I have them? All these massive could possibly be life-changing questions. Who am I? What did I do? What do I then do with these questions?
Yeah, so I think a core thing that everybody should look at is their own personal core values, because our values underpin our thoughts and our actions and our behavior. And our values shift and change as we go through different life stages, and our priorities and our outlook on life changes. So I think that's important, is to check in with yourself in terms of what are my core values, where am I at now, what life stage am I in, and because our values determine what is of value or what is of importance to us, and they help us put down boundaries.
Absolutely.
As to what's for us or what's not for us. So definitely looking at your values, number one. Number two, I would then, from a personal perspective, maybe look at 3 areas of your life. Well, one is from a health point of view. What are my health goals this year? Because if you're not well and healthy yourself, you cannot be well and healthy for other people and be there for other people.
Yeah.
So making self-care a priority, especially in today's fast-paced world. And then looking at, what are the other personal areas in my life? So from the people and the relationships in my life personally, where are the areas that need to be improved on? And what other areas do I want to improve on? So whether it's from a faith or a religion point of view, whether it's from achieving personal goals, whether it's eating healthy, and then, they spill over into our career as well from a professional point of view.
Yeah.
Because, we are one person. There's no split between we are a work person and a personal person.
Yeah.
So they do spill over into our professional life as well. So what are personal skills that I want to learn for myself? For example, could it be I want to communicate better? I want to be able to deal with conflict better. And that will also impact you in your career as well when we start looking at professional skills we want to develop.
All right. Let's wrap up with the personal stuff then. I've checked in with my values and I think... Actually, I said I wanted to be a better person, but that one particular instance or encounter that I had with Paula earlier in the year didn't quite sit well with me. I think I may have spoken to her in a manner that doesn't quite align with who I say I am as this decent human being that I'm trying to be. What then do I do? Do I go back to Paula and say, actually, listen, it might have been 6 months ago, but I actually still think I owe you an apology? Or is it something that we sit with ourselves and say, right, in my next encounter, in my next conversation, apologies with Paula, how then do I make sure that I'm not speaking in a tone that one doesn't sit right with me and two is disrespectful or this is just a random example. But again, I sit with this information and do what with it?
I think, if there are areas of your life that you need to get closure on for yourself so that you can move forward, so that you don't stay stuck in the past or that you don't have regrets. If it is a situation where you can go to that person or persons and sit down and have honest conversations to get closure and forgiveness and healing, absolutely do that because it lifts the weight off your shoulders. If you're unable to be with that person, then what I would suggest is write it down. Write it down in a letter somewhere, being completely open and honest as if you were speaking to that person, and then do some kind of symbolic act of getting closure on it. So whether it's burning it, burying it, flushing it down the toilet, it doesn't matter, whatever it is for you, some symbolic way of releasing it and letting go and getting closure.
Another one of those you mentioned was self-care, right? And we often think that self-care is something that's expensive and far out of our reach and something we have to plan into if we want to go to a spa, these luxurious spas and so on. How do we practice self-care, without breaking the bank, but still being able to take care of our health and well-being?
First of all, compassion, empathy, and understanding for yourself, number one, and then for others.
Yeah.
And then start looking at other ways of being, taking care of your health and well-being. So exercise, and exercise doesn't mean you have to go to gym every day. It's simply going for a walk every day outdoors in nature. Can be 10 minutes maximum up to 30 minutes. 3 times a week would do you great in terms of your health and your well-being. And then eating healthy and definitely sleep. Those 3 things have been linked by research to our longevity and our mental and emotional well-being. So I would look at those areas as well from a self-care point of view. And then lastly, who you are surrounding yourself with in terms of your relationships. Are they positive and uplifting, or are they toxic and draining?
How do we identify that, Paula, in the moment? Because sometimes it's only after a long time, after a year, and often the damage would already been done. But after a year, I realize actually this person that I've been hanging out with for most of the year turns out to be a little toxic. I've picked up traits from them and behaviors that I perhaps don't want to be a part of who I am. Is it not too late if it's a quarter, after 3 months, if it's a year, after a year, to then think, actually, I want to cut you off in December because it turns out you're quite toxic? How do we do that in the moment?
It's never too late to cut something toxic out of your life, whether it's a person, a habit, or an environment, right? Because the longer you're in that environment, it is going to affect you negatively, your mental, emotional, and physical well-being. So it's never too late. I would identify, is this person or this thing adding value to my life? If it's not, can I shift it? Can I change it? Can I turn it from a negative into a positive? Am I willing to do that because I see value in this person or this situation? And if not, then what are my options? And one of those may be walking away from it to save yourself and take care of your well-being. And that doesn't mean that you're being a nasty, ugly person. It just means that you're being honest with yourself first and foremost before you can be honest with the person or that situation and make the decision to walk away from it.
All right, Paula. So that was the personal aspect of it, right? Checking in with your values, self-care, making sure that you're taking care of your health goals, and then the relationships, removing the people that are toxic or not serving your greater purpose. Then you said there's a spillover effect, of course, into the professional space because the two don't exist in isolation of each other. I am who I am at work, the same as I would be, for the most part, who I'd be at home. What are some of the big things that we need to look out for at work when we are doing those introspections? What am I looking out for?
So from a career point of view, what are your career aspirations? Where are you in your career? Are you young and ambitious and want to climb the corporate ladder? Are you sort of family orientated and want to spend more time with your family? Yeah. Or are you sort of heading towards the retirement stage, and what are your plans for when you do step out of corporate? Those will determine the focus areas and what kind of goals that you want to put in place for yourself there. So it could be you want to study and enhance your skills from a formal point of view, and so finding programs or courses that talk to that. It may be seeking mentors that can help you grow and, develop other skills. Definitely relationship skills, emotional intelligence skills, so communication, conflict management are key in the workplace as well, because we're dealing with people and relationships just like we do in our personal life. Leadership skills and definitely technology. So those are the areas in our professional career that we should be looking at enhancing to continuously evolve and grow so that we remain relevant in the working world of tomorrow.
Does it ever differ, Paula, based on what industry you might be in or what line of work you're ever in, or can this apply across the board?
So definitely, industry would be, you'd have to look at the trends of the industry because some trends are different to others. So let's take technology, for example, versus maybe a services-orientated sector. But the technology is across all of them. And also, looking at global best practices and what is happening out there in the rest of the world so that you can remain relevant, because the world is very small these days and a lot of people are doing remote working and working in other parts of the world.
Yeah. Paula, at what point do I call in a professional, or is this everything, all of these mechanisms or I guess tools that you've mentioned now, things that I'm able to do? When is it necessary for me to call in a second eye, reinforcement, professional help? At what point, either in the professional aspect or in the career aspect, do I need to then call in reinforcement, the likes of professional career experts, relationship coaches, life coaches, we have this conversation with you now. When do I need to come to Paula and sit down at your table and say, actually, there's something that I'm missing here?
Yeah. Well, at some point, everybody needs help because we can't see our blind spots, right? And even the professionals need help. So, I would say if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling unsure of where to begin, if you're feeling like you're at a crossroads in your life, those are all good indicators that you may want to reach out. And it could be a professional, it could be a role model or a mentor or someone that you look up to and respect and are inspired by. And go and sit down with them and unpack where you are. And they can help you hold up the mirror and potentially see the blind spots that you can't see and give you some solid advice.
Is this advice that I can also get from friends? I mean, I don't ever want to be in a situation where it's the blind leading the blind. My friend is asking me but I have no idea, and I'm responding, from my own personal experiences, which might not necessarily fit a particular scenario that my friend is going through. So, is it always professional help? I mean, again, we often will say, I actually don't know where to find these resources. Well, I don't have the money to pay for a professional life coach and so on. At what point am I able to rely on the people that are around me, my friends and my family, to help me get my life in check?
So I think, friends can be a safe space for us to lean into. I think if that person is able to hold the space for us and, be unbiased in their view and their opinion, and also withhold judgment, and we can feel safe being vulnerable with those friends, definitely we could turn to friends, but friends may not necessarily have the skills and the tools that professionals can have that can empower you to, take action and take charge of your own life.
Okay. For the benefit of somebody who's joining us now, take me through very briefly once I've introspected, so what the introspection requires and what then moving forward looks like. We have a text on a message on WhatsApp from Granny T in Boksburg. Granny T, I can't tell you how glad I am that you've been texting today because you disappeared for quite a while. That was just random. But Granny T from Boksburg says, as the song goes, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start all over again. And I stress that, Paula, because I don't want somebody who's listening now to think, because I didn't hit all the marks from last year, that it's the end of the world. So just speak to that, please.
Yeah, again, have compassion with yourself, because you may have set goals for yourself that were unrealistic to begin with in terms of either the time frame that you set for yourself, or potentially something else came along and took preference or priority over those goals. And that doesn't necessarily make you a failure. It just means you didn't get the result that you were looking for. So again, I would sit down and reflect on, how far have I come? What have I overcome? What are the life lessons that I've learned? And what do I feel that I want to focus on and achieve as my goals going forward? Looking at, again, where I'm at in my life stage. And then what action plan do I need to put in place to help me achieve these things and make them a reality? And then breaking it down into smaller bite-sized chunks or actions or steps that I can take, and putting the support mechanisms in place. So having an accountability buddy, whether it's a friend, whether it's a colleague or a role model, a mentor, or even a professional, that can be there and support us and hold us accountable to make sure that these things happen.
All right. That's Paula Quincy, who's the founder of Engaged Humans, speaking to us about the importance of reflecting on the past year and sharing some insights on how to extract valuable lessons from those experiences, from those achievements, from those setbacks, so that they're able to inform your personal growth going into next year, but also your professional growth. Remember, those accountability checks are going to be very important. If you have good company, fantastic, because you need to make sure that the people that are around you reflect who you are. But if you are able to get the resources, get the professional help, go to your life coaches. There's resources online so that you're able to reflect going into next year. It's not a once-off thing. Again, these are conversations that you continuously need to have with yourself, whether it's quarterly, whether it's, maybe twice a year. Don't wait till the end of the year when all of this just seems like it's all too much.